Now, allow me to call on Mr. Berhel Santos for his sharing about his experiences during the exam.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Rick Reyes, surely unknowingly, gave me a lifting sense of why I'm here. I happen to be one of those elders who have failed you by default. And I have been going to forums like this, trying to redeem myself. And Raisa, for her part, raised a question to which the answer would make a terrific preface to the little talk I am giving today. It's about the sense of press. You know, for all our freedom to seek and tell, a freedom we could not stop flaunting as a freedom unsurpassed in any other democracy. We of the Philippine press found ourselves absolutely in the dark one Friday night, 44 years ago. That day is done, and we, the boys of the press, cannot wait to begin making a night of it. Saturday and Sunday being lean news days, materials have been readied for the slack. Weekend work won't begin until mid-afternoon or even later. That is if everything goes normal. In fact, nothing is going normal. Nothing at all. No sooner have the newspapers gone to bed than the thief in the night strikes and steals freedom wholesale. Ferdinand Marcos imposes martial law and deploys the first weapons of dictatorship: roundup, checkpoints, censorship. Censorship impacts furthest and widest. A nation of 39 million awakes to a day without newspapers, a day of soundless and pictureless television, a day of voiceless radio. Radio plays some music, but music of the funereal kind, doubtless meant to heighten the air of greatness. Troops have descended on the media to ensure that no newspaper copy gets out of the plants, out into the streets, and that no voice escapes onto the airwaves. Censorship works as the first salvo of artillery meant to intimidate and soften the target. In time, media voices are heard again, but only as mouthpieces. Any voice that strays out of line is again silenced, its possessor punished. Thus was Marcos's martial law came down on us. Now, two friends of mine who happened with me at the recent forum arranged for us, something similar to this, to tell our martial law stories, were among the journalists who had heard about the worst of it. Pete Lacaba had suffered beatings during his 2 years of detention, but could not be stopped. Once released, he returned to the underground press. It was to his press that we, who were working safely overground, secretly passed stories we were forbidden to print or air. The other was Ceres Doyle, now a columnist of Inquirer, who took the fight to the dictator continuously and suffered harassment continuously at every turn, threatened, picked up, taken to court. It was I, in fact, who had it easiest. Although I have my own first-hand stories to tell, not to mention impressions too fearsome to keep to myself. Indeed, it eases my conscience somewhat retelling them, as puny as they may be in the larger scheme of things. Such scheme as has seen 75,000 of my countrymen tortured. As it happened, my first of only 2 collisions with the regime stemmed precisely from a piece about its brand of censorship. I had written that about the only types of news published in martial rule Manila were called positive news, that is, news that makes everybody happy, and passive news, news that makes nobody unhappy. The piece, given lead play in the United Kingdom Press Gazette, the British publication on the trail, caught the notice of the new and apparently eager to impress Philippine ambassador to the court of St. James, Jose Manuel Stylianopoulos. As difficult as it is to pronounce, let alone remember the name, I can never forget it. Stylianopoulos was a Bicolano who obviously had picked up the wrong philosophies from his Greek ancestors. He sent a copy of my piece to his patrons in Manila, who in turn sent me an invitation to an overnight tutorial bullying on patriotic journalism. Delivered in the night in the office, where surely by no coincidence I was working overtime and working alone, the invitation was to be complied with at the very moment. Understand that martial law is a season of emergencies, which in our case was to last 14 years. My second case happened 6 years later, for 2 stories of group journalism in which my only role as a rewrite man, was to fashion them together. As we say in the newspapers, wrap it up. The first was a story of Ninoy Aquino's murder, the only one to come out on the same day as the murder. It was published in an extra edition of a popular tabloid. The second, published a week later in the same newspaper, was an account of Ninoy's million-mourner funeral. Both stories had been passed upon by the House Censor, the editor-in-chief himself. But, again, do understand that martial law by itself is a story about fall guys. A common criminal falling for the murder of Ninoy, a workaday newsman falling for the revelation of the wrong truth. The day following the second offense, I only floated around in the office deskless. Eventually, got thrown out onto the street. The other fall guy, of course, did not live to tell you his own story. Over time, in any case, over time, indignation always builds up until dictatorship and censorship finally meet their match in a nation's exploding desire to be free and to be heard. In our case, the explosion was EDSA. Nothing, in fact, was special about Marcos's censorship. Nothing at all. was standard. Censorship can scarcely be improved on. It works perfectly enough as it is. Nothing either was special about his dictatorship. It was standard too. Murderous, covetous. If anything, it carried those qualities to extreme. Anyway, we are supposed to be rid of all that. But are we really? Indeed, I wonder whether we have not worked censorship into our own systems. And in fact, done so to the advantage of the very characters that gave us censorship. For how explain, other than by the expediency, expedient irrationality of outrageous fortune, such forebodings of a Marcos revival as we've been observing since too early on? A mere 6-7 years after being driven out of power into American exile, the dictator's family was back, unpunished, unrepentant, in fact, blatantly extolling its patriarch, demanding a hero's funeral for him. He has been lying in a preserved state, awaiting the patently undeserved honor, which should come in time if the media persist in what seems now a habit of self-censorship. And in complicity, the nation stays true to its shallow, self-seeking culture. The odds actually have been going the Marcoses' way. Ferdinand's family has established itself in positions of power and patronage. His widow sits in Congress. One daughter is governor of his native province, and the other has reclaimed her place in high society. And his only son, although losing narrowly in the contest for vice president after serving his statutory 3 senatorial terms, is no less than the new president for a self-proclaimed rehabilitator, Mr. Duterte himself. Mr. Duterte vows to make Ferdinand Marcos Jr. his deputy president. Of course, the law does not allow that, but tell them to Duterte and his Marines. He has, in fact, a more definite plan for Marcos Sr. He will bury him a hero indeed. And on his birthday, September 11, indeed, it feels like a lost 30 years. In fact, it feels as if we had gone backwards from EDSA and begun raising the dead dictator through his son by self-censorship and other defaults to give him another go at it. Maybe this time it finishes us all off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Santos, for your insights, not only during martial law, but current issues we are facing now. We have about an hour for the open forum. So we encourage students to actually ask questions and also offer some of their insights. But we request every person who will participate in the open forum to first introduce themselves and their institution, whether they're students or professors or journalists. And at the same time, please keep your comments short so that we have more time for discussion. Thank you. You can raise your hands.